Hey, I'm back. Video number 2. All right, so our first lesson, I guess, is dealing with logic and how to identify logic and categorize it and all that. But before we get into all of that, I want you to do a quick self-assessment on your knowledge of argument and persuasion terminology. Okay, so that's what this chart is here. You should already have this chart. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to categorize the words below into one of these columns, okay, right above the word list. So let's say, for example, you get the word non sequitur. Okay, it's a type of logical fallacy. I kind of gave you information already. So let's say like, oh, yeah, I have no idea what this word or phrase is. Then you would write that word right here. If you kind of know it, or maybe you've heard of it, but you couldn't tell me what it meant, then you would put it here. If you have a vague idea, like you can kind of explain it, or I can give you an example, whatever, put it here. If you know what this word means, you're like, yes, I know that word, then you would put it in this column. If you know this word so well, or this phrase so well that you could teach it to someone else, then you would put it in the far right column, okay? This is just to get a general idea of which terminology that will be used throughout this unit you're already comfortable or familiar with, or perhaps what you need more information on, okay? So I want you to take about 10 minutes, fill in as many terms as you can, and then when we return on Tuesday, we'll take a look at what you know, what you think you know, and what you don't know. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video. I'll wait. And then we'll get on to the next part of what we're going to talk about. Okay. Welcome back. Hopefully you had quite a few terms or terminologies in the far right, 2 right columns. But if you didn't, don't worry. By the end of this unit, then you guys are going to be masters of all of these. All right, so let's move on to our next activity or our next lesson. This one is a handout that goes on page 34 right in your notebook called Appealing to Logic, Deductive Reasoning Made Simple. Okay, so what I want you to do, take out a highlighter or some other groovy pen or pencil. I'll wait. All right. And I want you to follow along with me as we talk about what deductive reasoning is, okay? So taking a look at the top of the handout, you'll see that deductive reasoning is simply this idea, okay? If A is true and B is true, then C must be true. I want you to highlight, circle, underline that first sentence, okay? That's kind of like the quick and dirty definition of what deductive reasoning is. Now, a couple of things that you need to consider. A is a broad true statement. B is a more narrow true statement, but it's based or it derives from A. And then C is the logical conclusion that comes from both A and B. That is deductive reasoning. This formula is called a syllogism. Go ahead and highlight, circle, or underline that part. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is that generally when you talk about A, B, and C, those are, I'm sorry, A and B, those are what are known as premises, okay? A is a major premise, and B is a minor premise, or truth, okay? All right, so let's take a look at these examples. Major premise, due to a weak economy, the teacher salaries in our school district have been frozen for 5 years. Now, a minor premise that derives from this major premise is, my teacher, Mr. Sampson, has been teaching in this district for 5 years. These are both truths. Notice the first, or the major premise, that is a more general truth, and then the minor premise is a more specific truth, but it's based on this major premise. Logical conclusion, Mr. Sampson has not had a raise in 5 years. Or as Diego put it, Mr. Sampson is broke, okay? So major premise, minor premise, and then a logical conclusion. When the major premise and the minor premise leave no other choice but one specific conclusion, the argument is considered valid. Highlight, circle, or underline that whole sentence. Doing it wrong, but you know, whatever. Okay. Boom. And that's what you want, right? However, an argument can be valid and still be ridiculous. Let's take a look at the second example. So you have this major premise that says all boys are players. And there may be some of you in the audience saying, amen. And then you have a minor premise that comes from this major premise. Javon is a boy. Conclusion, Javon is a player. Well, to some people this may sound good. However, the problem is that the major premise is not a fact. Okay, some of you may disagree, but it is not a fact. All boys are not players. Opinion cannot be a major premise. I want you to highlight, circle, underline that part, okay? Opinion cannot be a major premise. And this is where a lot of people, you know, like that girl I was talking about who said, ooh, I'm going to be a good lawyer because I know how to argue. No. Generally what happens is people will form an opinion and then they will scream that opinion loud and over and over and over again, thinking that they are arguing or making their point. No. All right. I don't know if you remember me using this quote. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not everyone is entitled to their own facts. Okay. So opinion cannot be opinion cannot be a major premise. A syllogism is only sound if it's true. Okay, I want you to highlight the word sound, even though it's already in bold. All right. Okay, let's take a look at this next example. So you have major premise, girls are human. Okay, granted, some people may not agree, but it's true. And then you have the minor premise, boys are human. But look at the conclusion. Therefore, all girls must be boys. What? So it's easy to see that this conclusion is absurd. But the issue here is really the minor premise. Okay? Think of a syllogism as an inverted pyramid. The major premise needs to be broad, kind of general, and then the minor premise needs to be a little bit more specific. It's minor, okay? And the conclusion is very, very specific. That would be at the point. So if you were to see this in action for you visual learners, let me pull it up for you. Okay, go to the new slide. Rats. Hold on, sorry. Let's do this instead. Duplicate the side. Okay, so an inverted pyramid would look something like this. Find a triangle. Maybe it's already, there we go. Bam. Let's draw that. All right. Okay. So you have inverted. So at the top in the broad section, this is your major premise, right? And then inside, you have your minor premise. Oops. Again, like I said, it derives from the major premise, but it's a little bit more specific. And then at the very bottom, be lame. Okay, hold on. Okay, and then at the very bottom, you have what's known as your conclusion. Probably should have done this before I started the video. Conclusion. And that should be at the very tip because it's more specific. Okay? So, major premise, minor premise, conclusion. And remember, you want your syllogism, okay, the reasoning that you're building, you want it to be both. Let me see if I can make a so sorry. I hate when they do this kind of stuff on YouTube. I'm like, you know, get it together and then record. And here I am doing the very same thing. All right. So remember, you want your reasoning to be both valid and sound. Capiche? Caposh. All right, let's take a look at this last example. The human body cannot survive more than 3 days without water. That is a true statement. Hold on. The victim has been under the rubble for 5 days without water. Therefore, the victim is probably dead. Okay? Yes, you have one truth here. You have a more specific truth that derives from the larger truth, and then you have a logical conclusion. So again, valid and sound, which is the goal. Okay, now we're going to do an activity that is on the other handout that goes, I believe, on page 34 left in your notebook, and it's called the syllogism workout. It's this one right here. Okay? All right. I'll be back. So what I want you to do on this handout is this. You are going to choose whether or not each of these examples or each of these syllogisms is either valid but not sound, neither valid nor sound, or it's both valid and sound. Okay? I will tell you this. There is at least there's at least one that is both valid and sound. Okay? There's another one that you can make the case for it being two, either valid but not sound, neither valid nor sound. You know what I mean. Okay? So read them carefully, discuss it with your C partner. You guys can kind of vote together, or you can vote separately and then compare to see how you guys voted. If I were here, we would actually be doing a whole class thing, but this is the compromise. Okay? We'll talk about it when I return, and I'll let you know what the answers are. Okay? But yeah, have fun with this. Take about, I don't know, about 5-ish minutes, well, maybe 10 minutes, and then click on the next video for the next lesson. All right.